Mad magazine probably saved my life now that I think of it. I was introduced to it around 1972 by my cousin, and I was immediately taken, just flabbergasted that a magazine, aimed at kids could question everything in such a humorous way. Parents and teachers and just everything was questionable. And it's to this day, it's probably one of the few things I've read that actually tells the truth. Also, later on in 1972, do you remember the nostalgia issues of the Mad Special? Do you remember Nostalgia, in fact? Remember that? Around the time of 72, when I first got into Mad was doing these special editions which contained a little comic book inside, which took the best of their original incarnation, tales calculated to drive you mad, and reprinted some of the classics like Super Duper Man and Starchy. And it was only later on that I found out that these wonderful satirical stories were actually written by one guy. You know how on the Mad masthead it would say the usual gang of idiots. Well, in fact, the gang was just, although they had different artists all the time, there was in the beginning one idiot, Harvey Kurtzman, the great Harvey Kurtzman, who kind of in desperation created Mad as a way of just being easier on himself. He was doing these war comics for EC, and he tended to sink everything he had, just give it all he could to make it seem as realistic as possible. He subsequently became quite sick, and so his publisher, William M. Gaines, who a lot of the comic enthusiasts know about, said, Harvey, take it easy, do something that you can just kind of do from home that's just straight out of your head and out of your gut. And so, because Harvey had always been the funny kid growing up who drew cartoons and chalk on the road and all that type of thing, because humor came most easily to Harvey Kurtzman, he thought, okay, well, a satirical comic then, tales calculated to drive you mad. So Harvey Kurtzman was, in fact, the creator of this wonderful satirical comic book, the first comic book that really took on comic books satirically. One of the things that's bothered me about Mad History is that there's a tendency to say it's all because of William M. Gaines, the publisher. Yeah, but Gaines didn't write it. He didn't draw it. Gaines wasn't really responsible for the creative content that is Mad, what makes Mad so great. Dick DeBartolo, Mad's maddest writer, once wrote what was otherwise a very fine history of Mad called Good Days in Mad, and I don't think he mentions Harvey Kurtzman once, which really bothers me because it's saying that William M. Gaines is responsible for Mad is a bit like saying that Louis B. Mayer was responsible for the Marx Brothers or Buster Keaton. It's just no. He was the business guy. He allowed it to happen, but that's not the same as creating something. Having said that, Bill Schelly does set the record straight in terms of why Kurtzman didn't stick with Mad and why couldn't he make it into the humor magazine of his dreams. So he does at least explain that. And as much as I hate to admit it, commerce and art do have to go together. And just because a guy can be terrifically talented as Kurtzman was doesn't mean he necessarily has a head for business. And so we see that Kurtzman, despite having huge masses of talent, tended to sometimes take too long on things, and maybe this made some business people nervous, and it's very interesting to see how a man's dedication to his art can also trip him up. So I really appreciate the time Bill Schelly took to tell the story of Harvey Kurtzman and the complicated history of Mad and why it wasn't all Kurtzman and it isn't all Bill Gaines. It's somewhere in between that allowed this to happen because, why couldn't Harvey? Harvey never quite was able to duplicate the success of Mad elsewhere, and why was that, So Bill Schelly addresses this extremely well. This is as up close to Harvey Kurtzman and his entire career as we're ever likely to get. Bill Schelly's done a wonderful job going through the Kurtzman archives and talking to all his colleagues and friends and family members, everybody he could possibly get. And so I don't think he's left anything out. I was really pleased with it. It reminded me of a book that David Robinson, the Chaplin scholar, had written called Chaplin, His Life and Art. And in particular, I remember a review of that book which said, unlikely to ever be surpassed. And that's how it is with Bill Schelly's book on Harvey Kurtzman. It's absolutely essential for anyone who loves Mad, loves Kurtzman's work. And I do recommend you buy this book if you love Mad and love Harvey Kurtzman and just want a really interesting story about how satirical comics and how satire evolved from the 50s to now. You can't do any better than Bill Schelly's book on Harvey Kurtzman.